recognize a lot of familiar names and faces from our last webinar. My name is Hannah Brosnan. I am the Finance and Operations Coordinator with Mental Health America of Kentucky. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Our webinar today is the second session in a statewide learning series designed to increase workforce capacity to address early serious mental illness and first episode psychosis. This virtual series is made possible by BSCA funds through the Kentucky Department of Behavioral Health, Developmental and Intellectual Disabilities. I'm going to right now link the series in the chat in case you are interested in signing up for any of the additional sessions. Today's webinar is led by Dr. Melton, Dr. Ryan Melton, Ph.D., LPC, ACS. Dr. Melton currently serves as Dean of the School of Psychology and Counseling, Director of Assessment, and Associate Professor at Bushnell University. He is owner and operator of Endurance Counseling and Consulting LLC and clinical supervisor at Pace Health Hospital. Previously, Dr. Melton has served in a variety of director and university faculty positions. Thank you, Dr. Melton, for joining us.
Thank you.
As you all know and likely saw, this meeting will be recorded and then shared via YouTube. So please make sure that you are muted. Any questions that you have, we'll make sure to share with Dr. Melton at the end. So please put your questions in the chat and we will address those during the Q&A. All right, I am going to pass the mic now to Dr. Melton.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining smaller group today. But again, a very specific topic in early intervention with psychosis, talking about a very specific yet really important topic. I really want to stress that because it tends to be the topic which keeps clients engaged in treatment and really is the crux of the work that we're trying to do with early schizophrenia, early psychosis work in that. Sorry, I lost my screen for a second. In that we're trying to keep individuals on their developmental life paths, whatever that was. And oftentimes it's given the onset of when we start bringing in individuals into our programs, it's right around that age which they're engaging in either education or employment. So we'll be kind of talking about the models that are used to treat individuals that enter our programs in terms of both support employment and support education. So you'll see the acronym C quite a bit throughout the talk. That acronym is, again, support, education, and employment. I tend to put those together with this particular group because they tend to be doing both. You know, sometimes they're going to high school and trying to do a little bit of work. Sometimes they're going to college and doing a little bit of work. Sometimes they're going to college because they're looking for ongoing employment goals. So it all certainly ties together. But historically, the models have been separate. So we're trying to understand the best way to integrate support employment, support education with this early intervention in the psychosis population. I'll be discussing two types of the two groups in early intervention in psychosis today, the FEP group, so your first episode of psychosis group, and then your CHRP group, which is your clinical high risk for psychosis group. Each one has slightly different approaches in implementing supported employment and education. As Hannah said, we'll have time for questions at the end. Roughly, this will be about 45 minutes or so. But yeah, be typing in your questions as we go. And yeah, we'll hit all those at the end. I recognize that this talk is somewhat theoretical, just because there's just so many elements to it in terms of developmental needs of clients, fidelity-based work, structural-based models, and everything along those lines. So feel free to jump in with questions and make them as specific as possible to the clients that you work with, so we can address those. There's my email should you want to reach out to me in the future. All right, we'll jump in. All right, so we're going to learn some techniques with individuals in early psychosis programs, both for supported employment and education. We're going to discuss how to apply current supported education, supported employment strategies to your specific population. We'll go over some of the models that have existed for supported education, supported employment, with kind of the history of those models, what elements apply well with this group and which elements do not really apply that well. And we'll go from there. and then any other items that you want to be sure that is covered. And even if you have a topic that you want to make sure that I cover, you can type that in the chat as well now. And if I don't cover it, then I will make sure that I do that at the end. If I do, I can just check it off the list. All right, so I think we need to kind of talk about the key principles and elements of supported education and employment in early psychosis programs. These elements are pulled from historic fidelity models related to supported employment and supported education. Primarily, the most fidelity or the most research that we have is in supported employment. We have 20 plus years of the Dartmouth individual placement and supported employment model, which is a very effective model when working with individuals who have more kind of chronic illness. And that's where it was studied. And so that's where most of the data exists, or most of the outcomes exist. So what we've been trying to do over the past 10 years or so is figure out how to adapt that model to fit with individuals in early psychosis programs who have different developmental needs than, of course, individuals with more chronic mental illness. So you're going to see elements of this historic model. And then what I'm really going to talk about is how we've kind of adapted those elements, because I think the elements are good, but the elements need to be adapted both culturally and developmentally for the populations which we work. And I've had ongoing discussions with Dartmouth and those groups on how those models get modified. And there's still some ongoing research. That's mostly on the employment side. The education side is still relatively new, because education, unlike employment, gets split into two primary areas: your high school and then your post-secondary, or your secondary and your post-secondary. So your high school and your college. Those are two different systems which require two different approaches, and you got two potentially different populations in these two different models. So the intersectionality between this could get quite complicated in terms of really applying the most appropriate approach. But I think we'll start with the overall kind of key elements. The one which has existed historically is this rapid placement to employment and school. So if you're working with clients and they're talking about, if they're currently in school, if it's a younger individual, say high school, we want to keep them in high school. The data that we've found in Oregon in our early psychosis programs is if we catch them while in high school and we treat them while in high school, they graduate from high school at a very high rate. We actually found that we were graduating clients with schizophrenia or clinical high risk for schizophrenia at a higher graduation rate than the state of Oregon was. So we actually had an overall higher graduation rate within our population, which is funny. When I'd sit to these state programs or these state meetings, they'd say, "Are you saying that you're more likely to graduate from high school if you get psychotic in high school?" And I'm like, according to us, yes. The overall kind of percentage rate, and that has probably less to do with them developing psychosis, of course, and more to do with the level of support that we provide them to help them get through school. If we caught people if they had already dropped out, that was more challenging. Our data was not as good, if I'm going to be honest, in terms of getting them back into high school. We had a lot of GED completers in that way, but tougher if we caught them after they had dropped out. So the key here is, if they're in school, they want to work, to move as quickly as possible to maintain those goals. You have to do leave of absences, you do leave of absence, you can do what you need to do, but really focused on keeping them in school, keeping them in work if they are already, and then moving back towards school or moving towards work as quickly as possible, even if the individual is still symptomatic. There's a little bit of a myth out there that clients need to be completely clear of substances or clear of their symptoms before they can go back to work. The data doesn't support that at all. What the data does support is the longer that we wait, the more likely that they're going to go on disability. So we have, again, about a 3 to 6 month window to kind of get people involved in a primary identity around employment or education. Otherwise, the outcome for Social Security goes really high. So we want to be working towards this. And I know people have been concerned about, well, what if they're using substances? The data actually suggests that people working are less likely to use substances. So working in school in and of itself may actually be a treatment model to reduce substances. That actually has higher outcome in terms of reducing use than alcohol and drug treatment does. So really why I'm stressing, why we're having this whole talk on employment and education is it's really important. It's really important at a developmental level. It's really important in identity development. We want to send a message to these young people that this is what these programs are about. They're about you staying in school or working or both or whatever, wherever they are. So we want to open this to all participants. We want to make sure that our supported education employment specialists are on the clinical team, that they're meeting weekly, daily, however you do your structured clinical teams, but your supported employment specialists are on those teams, that they have a place at the table in terms of talking about what they're seeing, making sure referrals are happening. Again, what I don't sit in all your team meetings, but yeah, we are supported employment education specialists. In some cases, we're two separate people, sometimes the same person, depending on the size of the team. We're always had our meetings. We always had a section to cover employment and education goals because that was such a priority of the program. So we want to be talking about that all the time. We can get very caught up in symptom goals and substance use goals. We need to, as these programs, we really want to be focused on kind of what's next in the individual's lives and really kind of keeping employment and education on the forefront. I'll talk a little more about what I mean by comprehensive assessment in future slides. Certainly, education and employment are based on the client's interests, skills, and preferences. Sometimes they don't know those things. So the assessment is what's going to help the individual understand their interests, skills, and preferences. And I think this is a larger cultural issue because one of the questions in the older IPS supported employment models was, what's your dream job? And they felt that was a really good assessment question. My response to that is, yeah, that's decent if you have exposure to the world of work. And many of our clients, particularly clients in poverty and our clients of color, had less exposure to the world of work. So that question was a very limiting question. So I really wanted us to integrate certain assessments so people can explore and expand their world of work. And then follow along support. So those, once a person is in school or at work, that there is the support employment, the C is working alongside them to the extent that the client wants that to happen, whether that's at times in the classroom, at the work site, sometimes working directly with the employer if disclosure of the condition has been done, and other times more kind of shadowing. Had a support employment specialist who would support a client who was working at one of the larger like Target, I think it was, stores, and the client didn't want him involved in terms of talking to the supervisor, but he liked support. So our C would be a kind of a secret shopper at times. While our client was stocking shelves, he'd kind of walk by pretending to shop, and we'd check on it. You know, those kind of things, depending on what the client wanted. So those are your principles, your elements, is that these are work done in the community. We're trying to get people competitive jobs, competitive school. We're trying to get people into placement. We believe that people learn better when they're in the placement. So they learn better at work. They learn better at school. And if they have struggles at work, at school, the best place to have those struggles is at work and with school. One thing to understand about schizophrenia is that executive functioning, I think, and I'll talk about this in future webinars, there's some cognitive deficits, in particular in the areas of executive functioning, which means that the client kind of struggles with, at times, kind of going from step to step to step. And in therapy or counseling or meeting with clients, we kind of walk through steps with people, but they're going to more likely learn this if they're doing it, versus kind of telling them to do it. So working with somebody on the job site, working with them at school, or even role playing, if you can, will go a lot further. Full inclusion in, again, of the participants as well as the team, and then trying to adapt the workplace or school setting to fit the person and not the inverse. I'm as you heard in my introduction, I'm a dean of a college or a school within a university. And we are seeing more accommodation requests than we've ever seen in the history of our university. And we've certainly have worked very hard, and we have developed programs that basically can account for a wide range of neurodiverse conditions. things that we just hadn't really worked with before. I mean, we were used to having note takers. We were used to having um, transcription done. But now we're getting into lighting. We're getting into space in the classroom. We're getting into recordings. We're getting into, a wide range of accommodations, which we've been able to figure out. And then certainly shared decision making around the work or school placement. Not using not letting us guide it, but the client guide it. So those are your key elements. Those are your key principles. Okay, then kind of breaking those down in a little bit more detail. I mean, first and foremost is going to be engagement. We know this when it comes to our clients, and we want to engage them in work, in school if they're not already. And that is the outcome that these programs really should be looking for: avoiding disability, increasing functionality on the individual's life path that they had chosen prior to either the psychotic episode happening or the CHRP, the clinical high risk symptoms developing. So yeah, just kind of engaging in school and work. And honestly, we have found, at least my experience, is that we're able to engage clients in more of the clinical care through school and work, because oftentimes they want to stay in school, they want to focus on work, and maybe they want to take medicines. So they want to kind of maintain that identity that they were headed towards, and then almost want to avoid potentially the stigmatizing pieces of the treatment itself. So we almost tried to sell ourselves as a work and school program. And then, we have some mental health supports on the side that will help you do that. But really, we're a school and work program. It's just another kind of inverse way to be thinking about, our programs overall. Theme 2, staff expertise. So why we do want specific SEE positions. So whether, again, larger programs are going to probably separate out a supported employment and a supported education specialist. Some will separate out 2 supported education specialists, one for high school level, one for college level, because those are different skill sets. So the RCs become the experts in, whether it's a work environment, the school environment. They start understanding, if they're working with someone in high school, they start understanding 504s, IEPs, IDEA. If they're working in colleges, they're starting to understand notice of accommodations, working with the accommodations office, those type of things. If we need to do that, they start understanding financial aid, they start understanding window withdrawal, and all those policies. So they become the experts on really the systems related to employment and education. So really, most of the models around this say you want individuals who are designated in these roles. If it's kind of a part-time job, like I do therapy, and then maybe an hour, a few hours a week I do supported employment, it doesn't tend to work very well. Now, I fully empathize with smaller programs and say, hey, we can't really afford to have a full-time supported employment specialist, so our case manager is going to have to do some of it, and our therapist is going to have to do some of it. If we have to do that, we have to do that. But just really kind of designating that there is time for supported employment, supported education. Interagency community communication. So this is, we're again focusing on successes. Another thing that we did in our team meetings is when people got jobs, when they graduated from high school, when they got good grades, we always tried to hit on successes. So we weren't spending our whole team meeting kind of talking about the challenging clients that we're getting and targeting and highlighting successes that many of our clients had. I honestly think that helps with burnout, as well. And then to start to develop those relationships with employers that are friendly. I know one of our most successful C individuals, he recognized, we were working in a small town at one point, and he recognized there was a high level of stigma against individuals with mental health concerns. And so talking to an employer about hiring someone with a mental health concern wasn't going to go very far. So he even modified his business cards and said, hey, I help young people find their first job. Just kind of thought about how he was presenting, who he was supporting. And that actually went a long way. Yeah, they also had mental health conditions, but really they were young people looking for their first jobs. And that's just was a larger selling point in this particular community. Now there's other communities that were quite supportive of helping individuals with mental health concerns. It's just kind of knowing your community, but that's really what the expert role is with the C. Theme 4, interagency operations. Again, yeah, I think I talked about this. Really working with the team, part of the team, not separate from the team. I know that some communities, I've consulted with communities kind of across the country, will have a separate agency that support employment agency. If that's the case, can we get some interagency agreement that allows those individuals to attend the team meetings for the agency? So we're not just separate. Because we know when a clinical mental health agency says, hey, I'm going to refer this person to supported employment, the transition success is fairly low. Less than half of the time does that referral happen and get fully follow through. And that could be multiple reasons. Could be client not understanding, could be an error in the referral process, could be an insurance issue, 100 different things that can get in the way of that referral. So just really nice to have those agencies at least coming to your team meetings. We even had for a while, our Office of Vocational Support, so our state, what we call in Oregon, or Vocational Rehabilitation Division, the state, the part of the state that helps people find work. You probably have a similar program. We were able to identify a single person within that agency that would occasionally come to our meetings. So we really just building that relationship with other agencies. We found that was a really nice way to make sure that services were done. And this could be a school counselor on the school side of things. And a specific school counselor that worked with all of our clients at this one particular large high school. They were our go-to person. So relationships matter in that case. Obviously, matching interest with career goals. Again, as I mentioned before, you can ask a client, well, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up, or what's your dream job? If they don't have a good sense of the world of work, that's going to be a limited answer. So we'll talk again about that. We want to do values assessments, interest assessments, career assessments. I know those don't predict much in terms of if it says, hey, you should be a plumber, doesn't mean you're going to be a great plumber. It just means you have some values around what the job of a plumber is, but it opens the conversation. Some of our clients don't even know what certain jobs are. When I teach a career class, I used to with my graduate students, and I'd have them do these career values inventories, and they'd learn about jobs that they never knew existed. So it's just those type of assessments really open the world of work. And then other things to be doing around this theme of obtaining and sustaining employment and education is having, whether it be a group or having your C really do or help with some of the logistics around work. Instead of saying, hey, you should go fill out 3 applications as a goal, they're going to the places where the individual gets the application, getting the application, and then filling it out with them or supporting them in filling out the application. Most of our Cs had master applications that the clients would fill out. And we used an online program where they could have a master application. So they would just simply kind of cut and paste all that information to new applications. So really some basic, almost career coaching, things you would do with anybody, whether they had a mental health support or not. Some of the next theme, logistics, helping to understand what the resources are available in the community. Many of these career assessments that I'm talking about are available at career centers or at university centers, where you could do some of those. Certainly understanding your 504s, your IEPs, your IEDA rules. I know we had several community meetings and groups that would teach parents these rules. I used to go to those when I was, one of my first jobs or early jobs was to be a C. Didn't call it that back then, but I would go to these parent support groups just to learn about 504 laws and IEP laws, so I could support students staying in school and knew the lingo, so to speak. And then stigma, we're going to try to avoid that, zero exclusion. You're ready to work. We're going to try to help you work. I recall once taking a person who was fairly psychotic to a job interview because I was following the zero exclusion to the T, and he was pretty disorganized and he wanted to go. And I said, okay, I'll wait outside. He went in, did his interview, came back out. He did not get the job, and I'll say that. But we had a really good relationship because of it. And as he got better, he really trusted me and continued to try other jobs until he did get a job. So even I'm not a big fan of the old, they're too symptomatic, let's wait until they stabilize. That rule, I think, can send the message that you're sick, and we actually do have some evidence at work it actually helps stabilize people. There's also this myth around, well, work and school is really stressful, and part of early psychosis work, we do want to reduce stress. I agree, we do want to reduce stress, as we do know that high levels of stress can increase relapse and symptoms. But you know what's also stressful? Being broke and unemployed. So stress can kind of go both ways. So I think continuing to support people and moving towards work, school is still the way to go, even if they're actively using, still have some symptoms. Unless they're in the hospital, I'm going to give it a shot. All right. I want to talk a little bit more about this kind of history of a model that we've used historically, for individuals with more chronic illness, which is the individual placement and support model, the IPS model and this was just supported employment. Evidence-based practice, been around for many, many years, as part of the SAMHSA six-pack, so one of the big six in terms of evidence-based practices. Multiple trials, almost all show positive outcomes with job placements. Handbooks available that you can get. There's ones you can buy, and there's free modules on the SAMHSA website to kind of use this model. It's a full fidelity system with fidelity reviewers. Some states have centers for excellence to support this model. Again, overall, a good model for individuals with more kind of chronic illness. And I think the elements of the model, some of which we just talked about, are very good. They need some slight modifications for our populations. So here's your overall IPS principles. You read these, you're like, oh, those that look good. Open to anyone. Kind of talked about that. Focus on competitive employment. We're not talking about sheltered workshops here. Rapid job search, we kind of talked about. Client preferences, long-term supports, the IPS specialist integrated with the treatment team, and then benefits counseling. Those are great. Those are all really, really good elements in terms of help people find work. And again, some of those elements we talked about already. Again, however, each one of these, if you start getting into their fidelity manuals, has really specific language. And if you start reading the language, you'll start to pick up why it really was more targeted towards individuals with more chronic illness. So if you look at some of the research on FEP individuals, so that's your first episode psychosis, who expressed interest in vocational recovery, followed for 18 months. They got two conditions. One was IPS, one was TAU, which is treatment as usual. So whatever program that the agency was doing for job support. So the IPS did have significantly higher rates of employment compared to TAU. I always got to look at TAU closely, because sometimes people say, well, I need to do this really specific model as like TAU. It's got 50% of people employed. Still pretty good with first episode schizophrenia, as opposed to kind of 70% with the IPS. Now, research you sometimes have to take with a little bit of a grain of salt, because these individuals were probably incentivized to be part of this, and there's some other things that were factors that led to their success. But overall, we can find in comparison that this model works. Unfortunately, the rates of employment were no different at follow-up. So they dropped a little bit, and so there was no different than TAU and IPS after follow-up. So IPS tended to help at first episode people get jobs really quick, but the challenge was they weren't sustained. So it's this research that I go, okay, well, that's a problem. How do we help people then sustain work? We're good at getting them jobs, but it's now about sustaining work as well. And then we also know that the CHR group, the clinical high risk group, they're in school. So most of them are in like high school. So 87% of survey school providers reported involvement with youth with suspected risk or early psychosis. So the CHRP group, they're in high school. The FEP group, they're a little bit older. They're more probably gearing towards work. CHRP group, they're in high school. but we don't have a good fidelity for supported education in high schools and no solid research on the post-secondary, although there is a fidelity model for supported education in post-secondary. But really, if you look at that fidelity model, it's essentially the IPS model, switched all the words from vocation to education. So again, following some of those similar principles. So when we're doing this work with individuals with CHRP, now a CHRP group, this is a group now that hasn't fully developed a psychotic episode yet. So we definitely don't want to have any disability talk at this point, because it's still risk for schizophrenia. And we also believe we can catch it early, that we can curb the potential biopsychosocial consequences of schizophrenia. That's the whole point of early intervention. And kind of for those of you who were on my talk last week, that's all I kind of talked about, is like, we catch this early, we get good outcomes. And part of where we get outcomes is we keep people on their functional goals. It's not just about the counseling or potential medications. I think a lot of the work that we do in really early intervention is just keeping people in school, keeping them away from the potential disability system if we can avoid it. And I fully understand that at times people will have to head down that path. So here's some of those tips, for the CHRP group. And some is, we're going to help with long-term career goals. A lot of the historic vocational models for more chronic illness were basically the goals were to get people out of the structured workshops and get them into jobs. But there was a lot of, let's work on part-time. We don't want to stress them out. We don't want them to lose their benefits. So there's a lot of language in those old employment models that talk about that. Well, again, we don't want that language for our CHRP group. So we want to be talking about jobs. If you're going to go work at fast food or a restaurant or something like that, jobs are steps for long-term careers. Jobs are, maybe, and that's what we're talking about. So we're always kind of talking about that versus, oh, you got a job, we could check it off and we get a fidelity point for that. We like people to stay open in their SE programs, even if they kind of like, I don't want to work right now, or I don't want to go to school right now. Keep them open, because we work with young people. I don't know if you're familiar with teenagers, but they change their mind a lot. And so they'll go for, and they've changed their goals a lot. And why do they do that? Because that's part of identity development. It's part of what they're supposed to be doing. So I'm not a fan of, let's put people in education programs, and once they get out way educational goal, we have to close them. It's like, give them some time, do more exploration, allow that to happen. One of the best predictors of whether or not someone's going to stay in school or work is whether or not they have family or a support system. Do they have a support system? Oftentimes it's their families, but it doesn't have to be their families. It's just like, do they have a support system? So we do want to include families in this process. We do like supported employment, supported education specialists in family groups. If you have a family group model that uses co-facilitators, like a multifamily group model, that's what MFG is. A lot of early psychosis programs use that model. We like supported employment individuals co-leading those groups. It helps predict whether or not the individual is going to stay in school or work. Work through your policies to be able to text clients, email clients. I understand it may be secure, but we need to work through that form of communication. Try to avoid stigmatizing service settings. Part of why we had our voc rehabilitation counselor come to our office is because their office was incredibly stigmatizing to individuals. Just a lot of disability talk. Oh, your disability doesn't limit you. Those type of statements, which are fine statements, and I don't mean to downplay them. But if you're a 16-year-old, you don't think you have a disability. So if you see a sign that says your disability doesn't define you, you're thinking, well, why am I here? I don't have a disability. So those can be unintentionally stigmatizing. Another key thing, many of the programs that we tend to run have our staff working like 410s, something like that, because we don't want people to check out of school to come see a counselor with the goal to stay in school. If people are in school, we want to keep them in school. Appointments should be made after school. That type of goals. Most of our teams in Oregon use occupational therapists to do cognitive and sensory assessments. Those you could also use psychologists, or master's level clinicians can get trained in these assessments as well. These type of assessments help us understand what the cognitive level is and what kind of needs that the individual may have in a school setting. Like I said, we have students now that we found that back of the room worked better. We actually found that front of the room worked better. We found that by a window worked better. We found with one student that had tables, if they had their own table, they did better. And all those came out of sensory assessments and cognitive assessments. So those little shifts in the classroom can make a big difference. You saw in the IPS model that they do benefits plan and counseling, benefits counseling. Well, a lot of, if you read the old IPS model, a lot of that benefits counseling is around disability, food stamps, housing, a lot of those types of resources, which again, younger people, we don't necessarily want them to kind of head down that route if they don't need to. So a lot of the benefits planning that we do is around health insurance. If you're going to go to this job, does this job offer health insurance that's going to help support medicines or treatment? Or do they pay for school? We found Starbucks was a pretty good employer. They paid college tuition. Those type of benefits that individuals this particular group might be looking for. You may want to combine a supported education and a supported employment specialist. For some people, that might be going from high school to college, so it's the same person through that transition. If that makes sense for you. I know some of the fidelity models don't like that. But again, I think we're at a different developmental stage. And remind you that most of the fidelity models around supported employment were developed, again, with more chronic mental illness. Be deliberate in your transition planning. If people leave your program, make sure that employment education goals have been at least established. And then I really am a fan, which I know some of the old vocational models are not, but I'm a fan of using career value, skills, and personality assessments, to really help people understand what their values are around work, what their skills are around work, what their personality is, and what jobs that match to. Again, none of these assessments say, if I take one of these and it says I need to be a coroner, doesn't mean I have to be a coroner. Just means it opens the conversation about what are the values of a coroner. What are other jobs similar to a coroner? Why was a coroner come up? You have those conversations. These type of assessments are not intended to have predictive validity. That's an error that people think about, why they downplay these type of assessments all the time. It's like, well, I took one in high school and said I should have been a firefighter, and I hate that kind of work. Why would I even do that? It's like, well, that's not the point of these assessments. All it may have told you is you have values that are similar to a firefighter, which means maybe you care about people. What are there other jobs that where you care about people? So again, these type of assessments open up conversation. They're not intended to be predictive, like, oh, it says you're going to be a firefighter, then you have to be a firefighter. So we use in Oregon, the Oregon Career Information System. Our early psychosis program's got an account with this. I imagine you have something similar. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But the point is finding something that allows our younger people to log into, to go through career inventories, personality inventories, skills inventories, values inventories, and having our Cs do that work early on to really kind of help people understand what the world of work looks like. To kind of get, some of you may have questions about fidelity. Fidelity is when you get into an evidence-based practice work, there's something called a fidelity measure. Fidelity measures do not measure outcomes. I want to be clear on this. Fidelity measures how well you do the intervention. So there's fidelity for cognitive behavioral therapy. There's fidelity for internal family systems, all these kind of therapeutic approaches. And then there's fidelity for supported employment and supported education. The supported employment strongest fidelity program is IPS. And then there's a fidelity for post-secondary supported education. There's not a good fidelity model for high school. So I've worked with the IPS individuals to come up with some recommendations around how to modify the fidelity for for our populations, essentially. Oftentimes, because the supported employment models, like a focus on supported employment, they'll limit caseloads. Say you can, that a supported employment specialist has to have 20 or fewer clients. I think that's awesome if we can do that, but we do not want wait lists. You do not want a CHRP person waiting to get support because Fidelity says that the supported employment or supported education specialist is booked, is full. We're going to put them on a wait list. You do that, then you're curbing identity. You're in that, again, that 60 to 90, that 3 to 6 month window where people potentially are losing their identity. So we want people, again, got to move quickly to kind of get people in school and work. So if you have to increase someone's caseload a little bit, hire someone else. I don't know, but do not, what we don't want is people to be waiting on educational or vocational goals. Sometimes these Fidelity programs will say that the supported employment person only has to do, can only do employment, nothing else. And to an extent, I understand that we want people specialized in employment, and a lot of things are related to employment. For example, I got in a debate with a supported employment specialist who told me, well, I couldn't help the person get a food handler's card because that's case management and I got to focus on employment. And I'm like, I'm rolling my eyes here. They need the food handler's card to get the job at the restaurant. It's related to work. Could we please not get so rigid in our definition of what you're doing here? Because that food handler's card was going to help them get a job. Now you sent that to a case manager who then was really busy, and then they went 6 months before they even got around to getting them. I'm exaggerating a little bit. It wasn't quite that long, but it was still waiting, before they get their food handler's card. So I think a little vocational related case management is fine. Helping them fill out a FAFSA for college, helping job applications, going through some benefit planning, looking at benefits on what the job offers, those type of things work, I think, help strengthen the SEE model for the individual. I'd like to see combined supervisors. So when a supervisor is overseeing an early psychosis program, that they oversee both the C and their clinical team. And get that isn't always the case, because oftentimes supported employment is put under a separate division. If that does happen, we at least want the supervisor of the supported employment program to be very aware of our work and the accommodations, cultural accommodations, and age accommodations that need to happen with the Fidelity model. Oftentimes, supported employment models are all about competitive jobs, like only competitive jobs, only competitive jobs. And again, I understand where the history of that is. It's because we were terrible to humans, and 30 years ago, where we put everybody in sheltered workshops when they had mental illness, we had them full towels. So we had to kind of do these kind of sheltered workshops. We were trying to get people out of sheltered workshops. So the pendulum swung very high to competitive employment. And in these programs, these early psychosis programs, we're working with individuals who are trying to develop skills in those cases, and they're trying to develop resumes because we're thinking about long-term careers. In those cases, I think it's okay to volunteer. I think it's okay to get an internship, because that's developmentally appropriate for a 16, 17-year-old. It shouldn't be all about, let's get them to Taco Bell so we can check off that they got a job, and we can send that data to our Fidelity monitor and see, look how good we are. I would much rather have a 16, 17-year-old volunteering at a pet shelter because they have a goal of being a veterinarian someday. To me, that makes much more sense developmentally and culturally. So I think that's where we sometimes have to make the modifications to those models. Follow along supports. Some of the older employment models are all about disclosure to the employer about your mental health concerns. I think sometimes that's really appropriate, and other times it's not. And of course, that's completely up to the client. Kalaki, the researcher who I've cited twice in this presentation already, also found that disclosure in the FEP group and the CHRP group, I think it was mostly FEP, disclosing to an employer that you had a mental illness had no outcome on long-term employment outcomes. So disclosure didn't matter in a lot of ways in terms of the research. So to me, you individualize it. If it's helpful for the client to disclose about their mental health condition to employer, great. If they feel uncomfortable about that, great. We'll work around it.
All right, well, I will go ahead and just provide some additional information. And that way, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat while I'm talking. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the second session in an 8-session series. And Dr. Melton is actually leading another session tomorrow. I'm going to go ahead in the link and play, or in the chat, link and place information on how to register for additional webinars. Again, these are all totally free. You can complete the post survey to give us some information about how you felt about the webinar, what you found useful, etc., at the link included in the chat. And that is how you can also request a certificate of attendance. Social work CEUs, this training is eligible. The live training is eligible for social work CEUs and may be eligible for additional as well. I am also going to include in the chat, upload it here, just the registration flyer for these sessions. If you don't want to visit the link, you can just check out this flyer. It'll give you a brief summary of what each of the sessions are about. If you have any questions, you can email Marcy Timmerman, our executive director. And I know you all have Dr. Melton's email as well. Looks like we don't have any additional questions. Christy says helpful information today, and thank you. And yes, Dr. Melton, thank you so much for another wonderful webinar. And we'll look forward to seeing you all soon, we hope.
All right. See many of you tomorrow.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.